The following presentation was recorded at the 2025 Southeast Linuxfest in Charlotte, North Carolina. It is licensed under a Creative Commons license. For more information on the Southeast Linuxfest, visit www.southeastlinuxfest.org. Come join us next June.
How's it going, guys? My name's Patrick Emerson, and I'm the Director of IT and Manager of Electrical Operations for New Spring Church in Wichita, Kansas. But I'm going to give you a little bit of background on what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to tell you a war story about how I got to be the Director of IT and kind of everything that come up to make that happen, and then with some lessons learned at the end. But my past, I actually started out as an electrician, and I was an electrician for about a decade and then went to work for a power plant. And while I was working there, I worked my way up to be a senior technician, but I've always been nerdy. I've always been playing in the computers, programming since we were kids. My brother's in the audience here, and we used to play all the time. And so the technology side of things always come easy for me. We did a lot of big changeovers, and that caught the eye of the director of IT of the South plants at the power company. Wanted to start a business to build automated leveling systems. So, I worked at the power plant for 10 years, and then after that, I went to go help start a startup where we built automated leveling systems for CNC machines. And as startups go, they say 95% of startups fail after 5 years. And after 5 years, we failed, and I was looking to start over. And so when I was looking to start over, I had a few other opportunities, but I'd always wanted to work at the church that I attend. They build incredible environments, and we've gotten to just make incredible things. And I started volunteering in the set design. And when I was volunteering there, I got to meet all the people that worked in the shop. And I thought, well, I'm starting over. I want to try to go in a new direction. And I said, hey, would you happen to have an opportunity for me? And because of my electrical background, and we're such a large church, there was plenty to do. They hired me to help with automation in the shop and to do the electric work. And that was great. For 2 years, we got to build all sorts of crazy things, from, environments for the kids and sets that would go behind pastor's message. That DeLorean there, the door actually opened up during the beginning of the talk and light shone out and fog. I mean, it was just, kind of a nerd's paradise. And then about 2 years in, it was April of 2020, there was a dark day. We didn't understand what was going on, but the network was down, the internet was down, servers, you couldn't, some people couldn't even log into their computers. Nobody really knew what was happening. And, we were listening, kind of talking in the hallways, what's going on? We found out they were starting to migrate to a new server. And I don't think there's anything really wrong with the new server that they were migrating to. It was a company that, is well known for building, nice infrastructure, but it was spendy. And but I don't want to drag their name through the mud, so I'm going to call them the vendor for the talk. So if you hear me talking, the vendor, it's the proprietary vendor software that we were in the middle of backing up to. And what I found happened, I walked into the server room, and the IT guy, he was sweating. He was rocking back and forth and just as nervous as could be. And I'm like, what is going on? And he says, well, we have a Windows server that's down. And I'm like, okay. He says, well, it's does DHCP and DNS. And if you're not familiar, those are highly required things for getting on the internet. It was our print server and our domain controller, and it had all been on a VM. Now, when they built it as big as it would fit on the hard drive, so that it was full 53 terabytes server in a VM running all these applications. And then as he was busy building this backup server, he wasn't paying attention to keeping the files trimmed down, and it filled completely up, which normally wouldn't be a problem, but there was a VM that had snapshot taken. They deleted the snapshot. Now, a VM snapshot's a little different. When you delete the snapshot, there's some orphan files that need to be consolidated. And if you don't consolidate those files, they actually take up more space. And after a 3-hour conversation with VMware, we realized it corrupted the VMDK. There was no getting the files back. It was gone. No, this was you'd be nice. Now it was Friday, just in time for the weekend, and we worked with the vendor, and there was a small glimmer of hope. The backup server 4 days earlier had made a copy of that VM, the full 53 terabytes, just 4 days earlier, and we were able to get it mounted across the network on a virtual machine. Now, this thing ran horribly across the network because we didn't have a very strong network to begin with, and we had to run the VM across it, but it brought up DHCP and DNS, and we were able to have the weekend. All the kids were able to check in, so it brought everything back up. But, it was an amazing moment, but then you realized you still had a long road ahead of you because you had a server that was completely, unusable, and you're running across the network. And it's completely full. The VM's completely full already, 4 days away from being so full it fails. So there was a lot to do, and I noticed the IT director of the time started taking half days off and looking for other opportunities. And, real soon I realized I was going to be the de facto IT guy. And I'd never done IT administration before, but I was going to have to figure this out. Luckily, I have a few things going for me. I'm pretty technically, I love a good technical challenge. This was quite the technical challenge. And I knew some folks in the industry that were, good friends of mine that I thought, well, I'm going to start calling some folks and seeing what I can do. So enters the Spirit Guides. The Spirit Guides, I have a friend of mine, David Wells, who works at Spirit Aero Systems, hence the Spirit Guides. He come over after work one night and looked at all the mess that we had, and he's like, oh, you're going to need a lot of help to unwind this. He says, but lucky for you, I've got a couple friends of mine who just retired that and they happen to go to our church, but they've worked in the data center. They are amazing. 2 days later, I had the backup administrator, Mark Patchett, and a guy who was part of setting up the domain controllers for Spirit were in my office looking at everything and trying to tell me, Pat, here's what you need to do. To unwind this mess, you're going to need to purchase many hard drives, and you need capacity more than anything, so you can play the shell game, so that you can get data moved off your server and have room for new data to come on. And you need to start figuring out what is valuable and what is not, and try to make some good decisions here real quick. So the next day, Mark Patchett shows up with 2 Dell T330 servers that have 8 bays in the front of them, and we ordered 9 8-terabyte drives, and we started. We formatted them as exFAT. Now we did that so that they could be installed. You could use them like a thumb drive, basically. So you could copy the data to them, but if you needed the data on a Mac or a Windows machine, you could you'd be able to hook them up and use them there. They also worked me over hard about the 3-2-1 backup strategy, how it was important to have 3 copies of the data, and preferably in 2 different media types, and one of them off-site. And they also said, but don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Do what you can to get moving on this as fast as possible, because time is your enemy. So we formatted them as exFAT, and as you can see, we used a lot of disk toasters when we needed some of the data off of it, because of course I'd move things that would be needed right away. We didn't have a second media type, but we did the best we could for one of them off-site. We just put them in Pelican cases, and we put those in different parts of the church so that you had physical separation as far as we could. Not great for geographic diversity, but not bad. Now, we were able to take the VM and migrate it back onto the server. As I said earlier, they're using the server, and we're doing these big migrations, and the network was just always busy, and it wasn't moving fast. And one of the things I realized is we needed to separate the roles. So instead of having everything happen on the domain controller, I needed to make sure that we couldn't fill the hard drive up all the way anymore. One of the things I didn't tell you about the vendor's server is it was a cluster-based file system. So when you're copying data onto a hard drive, it actually had to move to the hard drive and back to a cluster and back, to do the data side of it. And they had set it all up across the same network we're moving data. So it was painfully slow. And during this time, I realized I didn't have the room to keep 2 snapshots of VMs. I had to move to file level backups because the VM snapshots were so big with moving all these files. That brand new server that we bought was already 90% full. And so I had one server that was completely bloated and fell over, that we had to wipe the VM and then migrate that data back to restore that VM. And so I realized I needed professional help. So this is where I ended up calling in for Noah, because I limped this way for way too long. We built out the separation of roles, and we moved our data to the server that was purchased as a backup server. We turned that into the production server, so we'd be moving a little less data across the network, and we wouldn't be writing the data to the broken VM anymore. Now I had to start building a new backup strategy, and I had to start doing something different. And when I was looking for what to do, I knew that I wanted to build in the open source world because I've been playing there a lot previous in life. For a little more background, I'd been a tech enthusiast since I was a kid, but in 2012, I started listening to Jupiter Broadcasting talk about, they had a show called TechSnap, and there was a guy on there, Alan Jude. Alan would talk about the ZFS file system and how great it was. He was their biggest, proponent of ZFS you could find. And there was also another show, the Linux Action Show, which Noah was part of, and that's how I got introduced to him. And I knew that he owned a managed service provider company in Grand Forks called AltaSpeed. And so I reached out to him. I told him what was going on, and I explained that I had a need for building backup servers. that I wasn't familiar with how to do all of this stuff. And he started realizing we need to build you a true NAS box, Pat. We can build it on whatever we want because it's open source. So we bought a Dell server and we shoved some drives in there, and we were able to get our first backups since all of this happened. We're still growing at about 1.5 terabytes a week of data. So even though I moved 24 terabytes off, I realized that it wasn't going to take long and I was going to be in that same situation again. And so I was looking for what options were next. And that's when I watched a YouTube video with Destin Sandlin from Smarter Every Day. And Destin was having kind of the same problem I had. He had all this data. He didn't have a backup copy. And Linus Sebastian's worked with 45 drives, and they built a 15 bay, 160 terabyte server. And that was the first time I ever heard of 45 drives, but I figured with a name like 45 drives, they probably would be able to expand to meet my need as far as a large server, because I could see that capacity was the thing that got us in trouble. I did some research and I was pleased to learn that 45 Drives was a big fan of open source, not only on software, but hardware, that they had actually been a company that worked with Backblaze. Backblaze is a large storage provider, and they made these as storage pods for Backblaze. When they ask if they were going to do anything with it in the commercial space, whether they were going to try to sell those pods on their own, Backblaze says no, but if you want to make a business out of it, go ahead. And that was where 45 Drives was born. And so that's what they did. They took the hardware that was open, and then they built pretty much the same fast servers that they were building for Backblaze, and they used open source software. So they would use Rocky or Ubuntu, and they made their own additions to an open source project called Cockpit. And so they made their own modules that would slot into Cockpit. And I started looking at that, and I was familiar with Cockpit because I used that in the home lab before, but everything was there on GitHub, so you could just download what they were wanting to sell you and play with it ahead of time. After looking at that for a little while and trying to figure out what was whether it'd be a good fit, I figured I better reach out to him. So I called Dylan Tobin at 45 Drives, and I told him of our problem. And he almost sounded too confident that he could, he's like, I've seen problems like this before, and yeah, we can solve your problem. And so I started pricing out the S45, but they made one called the S45 Hybrid, and it had solid state drives. And after everything we were dealing with and everything being so slow, I just knew that we needed to get as much speed as we could the first time, because I probably wouldn't get a second ask if this didn't work. This is kind of the first step up to bat, and I needed to hit it out of the park. And I explained that to Dylan, and he told me, Pat, I promise you, we won't stop working with it until it takes care of everything you need it to. And so after he promised us that it'd work, we took him at his word. I presented it to my board, and about a month later, it showed up in the mail. Then I was wrestling with the decision to how to set it up. So I reached out to 2.5. Oh, here's the first one. Sorry about that. I had the first decision. I've been using TrueNAS before, and they said they would put TrueNAS on the box or they'd put the Houston UI. It was up to me. So I had to make the decision of whether to go with Houston that I wasn't familiar with or TrueNAS, which I was. I was kind of familiar with the cockpit interface, but what really led me to zoom in on doing it over Houston's really just a front end for the Linux server on the back end, where the GUI of TrueNAS, if you make changes from the command line, they might not everything you do there is going to translate directly to the GUI, where when you do that with Houston, it pretty much does. At that time, there was also a split going on where TrueNAS Core was moving to Linux and they were going to TrueNAS Scale. And there was a big talk and a lot of hubbub about what's going to happen. And I had already built my stuff as TrueNAS Core for my other backup server, and I wasn't quite sure that where this was all going to go. And this all happened right at the time I had to make my decision. And I thought, well, I better just go with what the guy selling me the server knows how to support and maintain. So I ended up going with the Houston UI. Then after deciding that I was going to go with the Houston UI, I had more decisions to make, because if you start looking into the ZFS file system, you realize there's a lot of questions you got to answer up front. How many disks to put in a VDEV, whether to mirror disks or not. And so knowing that there's another great podcast that actually has Jim Salter from Ars Technica and Alan Jude, the guy who wrote 2 books on ZFS and owns a company supporting it. They have a podcast called the 2.5 Admins Podcast. So I went ahead and sent a question into them, and they spent the last third of the podcast just answering all the different reasons and ways and why you would want to spin up a server a different way. One for speed, one for capacity, for resilience. So if you look up podcast 75, it's called Burning Fiber. If you want to hear kind of all the different reasons you'd want to set things up different, that's a great little primer right there. So we ended up going with a RAID Z2. We ended up going 12 wide VDEVs. So if you guys look at that, you got 12 disks that are all part of one file system, but 2 of them are parity. So that means you can lose 2 disks in that system before you'd lose your data. And so that gives you a chance to replace a bad disk before you lose the RAID. The next thing we needed to do was change our replication. So before, we were using rsync to copy files from the vendor's server onto our TrueNAS, but there's a ZFS replication that allows you to move snapshots, and when you move snapshots, you're doing block level moving, and it's only the blocks that changed, and it's a lot faster and it's a lot less data moving. And for a network that was already struggling with bandwidth, I was looking for every advantage I could get. So we, Peter and Kenny, they are from their workers, they're employees of AltaSpeed. They worked with me to change the TrueNAS servers over to replication. And we also knew that we needed to get an offsite, and so we bought another Dell server, and we moved that up to Grand Forks, and we started working on replication up there. And that's I'd like to tell you a little bit about either WireGuard or Tailscale. If you've never used those 2 platforms, they are really great ways to do point-to-point networking between 2 computers without having to make any changes on the firewall. So if you haven't looked at that, we're actually moving our data up, replicating it to Grand Forks using WireGuard. Over the next 2 years, as we had great luck with the new server that come in and got all the data migrated to it, we decided it'd be good to have another server sitting there in a hot and ready state that we could back all the data up to. And we ended up purchasing the 45 XL60. It's a 60 drive server, and we configured it with the same file shares and we put it on the same network so that in the event that NSC1 ever goes down, I just have to change some IP addresses on the second server, and it will take over the role as the primary server. Now, there's a few caveats that you got to watch out for. You've got to make sure you check up how you're backing everything up, and you want to put a hold on your last snapshot, because you always have to have a common snapshot. So when you bring that NSC1 server up, it doesn't write over all the changes that you just made. So there's definitely some traps, and I actually work with 45 drives to work all that stuff out with their service department. But at that point, I'd spent most of my server buying budget and buying hard drives and servers, and I was copying everything except the video 3 times. The video that come in, we were creating 1.5 terabytes a week of video, and I just didn't have, I couldn't send it up to Grand Forks because you couldn't send that much video every week over the internet without, completely bombing our network connection. And 45 drives come out with the 45 Home Lab. The 45 Home Lab, it's a 15 bay file server, but it's got much lower spec hardware than their AV15, like what you saw Destin with. It wouldn't be great for serving the data to everybody all at the same time, but it was perfect for a third spot to land the data. So after we got done setting everything up, we got our 3 copies of the data in 3 locations, and we finally built enough capacity that we could expand that file system multiple times over. It was time to work out some niceties. One of the things that we did is we worked on the employee self-serve for when they delete files on the Windows side. You can set up volume shadow copies so that the ZFS snapshots show up as a restore point that they can go to. Just right click on the folder and restore from previous version, roll down through the snapshotting and grab the file that they either clobbered or deleted or misplaced from a previous time in history. And that gets used all the time. We did have one time where snapshots saved Christmas. We had them lose the folder 2 days before Christmas that had all the audio tracks and everything for the worship team 2 days before Christmas, and we were able to restore in minutes from snapshots. So which was weeks worth of work for them turned into minutes worth of recovery for us. We ended up building out. We were on ESXi. We changed over to Linux KVM virtual machines, and we were backing them with ZFS, and we take snapshots every 15 minutes, and then we replicate those snapshots down to the backup server. So now if we have a bad day, we've got a copy of our own server sitting ready to go. And we've been able to use those. I made a misconfiguration to the wireless controller. We use Unify, and I messed up the wireless controller, and none of the internet was working at the church. And within 15 minutes, I was able to go back before I messed up that configuration and load that wireless network back up. So really nice having snapshots. It's great when you can say, I had a problem, but I self-rescued. The next thing we set up was alerting. So Uptime Kuma and Libre NMS and Alert Manager has been great for letting us know when equipment goes down. There's times people have unplugged a network switch, and I'm calling the person who I know runs that area and say, hey, did you unplug the network switch? He says, oh, grabbed the wrong cord. Sorry. Plugged it back in and, took care of business. So really nice to have that alerting that's fast. The other thing, we're getting metrics from Grafana and Prometheus. And so that allows you to see graphs over time. So as people are deleting files, you see your snapshot size grow larger. As you start running out of space, you get to see it on a big graph. I've got a 17-inch iMac that's mounted to the wall that's from 2017 that's running Linux and just there to show me my Grafana dashboard so that I can keep an eye on things. And why it matters, when I come across our infrastructure, when I come on board, our infrastructure was 100% proprietary and expensive. We've been able to keep the budget tamped down, not by not having tons of licenses to pay. And that frees up capital that I can spend on buying hardware and paying service to the companies that are willing so I can have a phone number to call and somebody will answer the phone. So I buy service from 45 Drives and from Altispeed, and I can do that because I'm not spending all my money on licenses. What I've learned in the last 5 years is IT is hard, but it gets a lot better when you pull smart people in around you. And there's a community of people out there who will help you answer questions. We live in a world where people are packaging up some amazing solutions to the problems that we have. And, when we ask around, we can find out that they're there. And it's good to pay for service so that there's people there who's, available to answer your questions. So, when that I haven't been able to give back to open source very much, but if I can find people that I can, assist them by hiring them, then they stay in that, just like 45 Drives, right in that software because someone's paying their engineers, it's I spent hours on the phone with Altispeed, 45 Drives, and Clara Systems, and they've helped me craft and fill the needs that I have. I'm truly thankful for open source community that builds the systems that are valuable and gives them to the world, as well as the people willing to support it. Just a recap on what these things are. So snapshots are atomic, point in time. It's like putting a bookmark in a journaling file system. They're instantaneous and they don't take up much room, and they're great because even in a running VM, when you take the snapshot as if you just powered it off at that very moment, if you were to reboot that snapshot, that VM from that snapshot, as if it's just been powered up, like the plug's been pulled. So not promising that you won't mess up any databases, but it's nice to know that, unlike the VMware snapshots that left orphan files, this is a clean atomic point in time. Replication is the ability to move snapshots from one machine to another or move them around by the snapshots. And that's great because it's block level moving of the data, only the blocks that changed. And so you're moving a lot less data. And unlike rsync, you don't have to go through and categorize exactly what's there before you know what's changed and do any comparison. So it's fast. It starts almost instantly, and then your data moves. The other thing is capacity. One little gotcha on replication. If you ever lose a common snapshot between your backup server and your main file server, there be dragons. You have to keep a consistent common snapshot between your backup file server and your main file server. So if you're ever going to have to take the backup file server down, you need to put a hold on a snapshot so that you always keep that consistent. Otherwise, you'll be transferring all that data. And if you're talking a couple hundred terabytes, that's not done in hours, that's done in days. Capacity, plan ahead. Don't run out of slots. So don't run out of hard drives. Don't run out of slots to put them in. So as you're starting to see that you're getting around 50% capacity, make sure that you're starting to have those conversations about, okay, what are we going to do when this runs out? And, that's what got us burnt the first time, was running out of capacity. And there's been a couple times where our backup servers hasn't grown as fast as production has. So even when I had the problem solved on production, I've had to reship all my data to other servers because I didn't grow fast enough. Quotas. They force people to make good decisions. So quotas are artificial blocks that you can put in saying, hey, you can only put 15 terabytes on the server. And you want to calculate all your quotas and make sure they don't add up to more than what you've got on your file system, or they're doing you no good. But when you got them in there, they're like a fuse. Just last week, I had a quota set on production. And he says, Pat, says I only have 35 gigs left. I said, I can give you more, but you better start thinking about what you're going to take off. The next day, 10 terabytes of data was removed from production. So it forces people to make good decisions, and it starts a conversation. And it's a fuse that keeps servers from crashing. So scrubs, Linus Sebastian, the guy from the YouTube video we saw earlier, he built a petabyte server. He had it running for 7 years and never did any scrubs. When you don't do scrubs, you're not checking to see if every block, there's a check sum for every block, and it's not checking to see that those blocks are good, so it can't do all the fixing and healing that ZFS is known for. But it was absolutely a problem of not doing the scrubs. It wasn't that the file system can't take care of itself. It's that they didn't implement it. So, that's one of the first things I put on there. The next thing is parity disks. As we mentioned earlier, parity disks are the disks that have they're enough capacity to have the information from every disk with 2 to spare, meaning you can lose any 2 drives without losing your data. And it's also how the ZFS scrubs can fix those broken and bad blocks, because they have 2 parity disks to check from. If you do a RAID Z2, 1 if you do a RAID Z1, or 3 if you do a RAID Z3. Just depends on how important the data you're handling is. The next thing, documentation. When I started, I got 6 passwords and 6 usernames. It was a long way up. I've worked with Noah. We installed Wiki.js. We document everything. I try to have somebody else read my documentation and go and install, if I'm building a server, read my document and build a server. And if you can't do it, let's write down what I missed and just make sure your documents are good. Use a password manager. There's going to be a day where something happens to you. You're not going to be here, whether you're in Jamaica or a better place. You should plan for it. And then there's tons of resources online. This is a link that takes you to 45 drives. This is the YouTube video, 8 Perils of Data Storage, which is basically talking about all the ways things can go bad for you. It's a great thing to hit up on those things and just make sure you're covering all the bases. Is there's, just look for the resources that somebody's already put out there, because there's a lot of cookies on the bottom shelf we need to take. Well, that's pretty much the end of my talk. Do you guys have any questions? Thank you. Say that one more time on the mic.
How often are you running scrubs on your data?
Depending on the data, no less than once a month, but I do weeklies on the smaller backup servers that don't have as much data.
I was curious to hear more about your hard drives. I'm wondering, are you buying the fancy enterprise ones, or are you going for the economy ones? Do you get the ones for NAS? Do you have much attrition?
Well, I've done a lot of different things, and what I found is I really like the Toshiba 18 terabyte CMR drives. They are a NAS rated drive, and they're not cheap, but they are good. I did take a time where I was buying the Seagate Exos drives, and that I had about a 25% of the ones that come in. Now, granted, this was just past COVID, and a lot of the world was manufacturing with whatever they had laying around. So I'm not saying that they're like that now, but I had a huge failure rate with Seagate, and I switched to using Toshiba. And I still occasionally get a bad drive, but I'm spinning a lot of spindles, so it's to be expected to have a few.
And so with the high density that you're running there, do you buy into the idea of trying to hit multiple batches so you don't have a bunch of drives the same, or do you think about that?
Oh, I've thought about that, but usually end up that don't let perfect be the enemy of good. It's usually just a large purchase from a supplier. Last time I just reached out. You can't buy directly from Toshiba unless you're a reseller, but I just reached out to a reseller and bought from them. But I was buying 36 hard drives at a time, so I didn't take the effort of doing that. All right. Well, thanks for coming to my talk.